I love sport and you all want to work in sport but have no idea what job you can do in sport. Your personal brand is going to be probably the number one thing that continues to get you hired time and time again. That's when your career will start to take off. Networking is just kind of one of the three levers that you can pull on to land a job. At some point in time, you went to a sporting game or you played sport and you fell in love with it, and that's led to where you are right now.
Hello and welcome to the SportsGrad podcast, the ultimate guide to make it in the sports industry, brought to you by Deakin University, home to the world's #1 sports science school. If this is your first time listening to the show, my name is Reuben Williams. I used to work at Cricket Australia, and now I help other people land their dream job in the sports industry through SportsGrad. If this is your first time and you're wondering what is the purpose of this podcast, it's all about helping you get a job in sport. So if that's you, make sure you subscribe and I'll be in your ears every single week with advice on how to start living the dream in sport. Now, today's episode is slightly different because it comes from a recording of a presentation that I gave at our good friends Deakin University. And in that presentation, I cover a range of topics all about landing jobs in sport, of course. And in the crowd that day was mostly undergrad and postgrad students from their sport management and exercise science courses. But for the most part, when you're listening to this, the principles of what I share can be applied to you no matter what stage of your career you're at. So if you're a bit later in life, a bit more mature, trying to make a career change into the sports industry, have a listen to what I'm saying, but obviously adapt the context to you. But I think you'll find that a lot of the advice in principle is still highly applicable. So without further ado, grab a pen and please enjoy this podcast live from Deakin University.
Hi everyone, and yes, welcome to the 2025 edition of our Sports Talks guest speaker series. These sessions every Tuesday are designed so that we can bring some of the leading thinkers in the sports industry to Deakin to share their knowledge with students. And I'm hoping we can make these sessions as interactive as possible, so there'll be plenty of time for questions. Maybe I'll stop at a couple of key points during the session today to invite questions from the audience. And then at the end, we'll also have a longer Q&A. So please have a think about your questions. We'd be delighted to hear them. At Deakin, we offer some of the best sport management and sports science programs in the world. So employability and how to get your foot on the job ladder is a topic that our students always love to hear about. And that's why I'm delighted to have Reuben here today, because there's no one better qualified nor more knowledgeable to talk about this, given he's been dedicated to this area for quite some years now. So Reuben, welcome. And to kick us off, rather than me give an overview of your story, I was hoping you could do that from your own perspective, perhaps give us the 1-2 minute version of your background and story.
Yeah, for sure. G'day guys. Thanks so much for having me coming to listen today. I grew up loving sport. The Socceroos in 2005 qualifying for the World Cup is what inspired me to want to pursue a career in sport. But when I got to high school, I thought, this seems pretty hard and competitive to break in. How do you do that? So I actually got a bit scared at first, went to a marketing degree, then dropped out of that after a year and a half and thought, let's just actually go all in on what I really wanted to do, and that was sport management. And once I changed careers into Deakin University and started sport management and exercise science here, that's when I realized that it's quite a tough job to get into sport. And so to break into a dream job in sport, end up taking a lot of networking and a lot of trying to sell myself and a lot of internships. But over the course of about 5 years between 2 degrees and 8 different internships, I was fortunate enough to walk into the commercial team at Cricket Australia the Monday after my final exam. And in hindsight, looking back, it was a lot of effort, but there was also a lot of very tactful things that you can do to make it, to not do it by luck. And so my goal for you guys today is hopefully share a lot of those things that I did to hopefully help you guys get the same result.
Thank you, Reuben. And your journey at Deakin was a key part of your development and growth into sport. Actually, to start, I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that, reflect more on your time at Deakin. What did you study? I know that you were the DUS president. What do you remember about that? I was going to say good or bad, but perhaps just focus on the good stuff.
Sure thing. Yeah, so I remember it being more enjoyable than my first degree. Shout out to RMIT. But once I got to Deakin, the good part was opportunities like DUS, because I was saying to the DUS team before, but the experience that I had at DUS as a president was probably the experience that got me the job at Cricket Australia, because it gave me an opportunity to work on something without too many restraints that led to a tangible end result, which meant that when I walked into Jollymont to say, hey, this is who I am and what I can offer, the answer I was able to share with them was I took an organization that had gone from 180 members a couple of years before down to 150, down to 125 the year that I took over. And with the committee's help, we grew it up to 213 within 1 year, which was an increase of 71%. And so opportunities like that to create tangible examples of what you can do is probably the best thing that Deakin enabled me to get out my degree. On top of that, I also did the US study tour. So have still got some friends right around the world from that trip as well, of which I'll go and catch up with a couple in the US next month in April. So really enjoyed my time at Deakin.
Quick one, have you got your eye on a future in sport? If you're ready to transform the industry, then perhaps get ready to study with Deakin and prepare yourself to redefine what it means to work in sport. That's what I did at least. Deakin School of Exercise and Nutrition Sciences is ranked #1 in the world. Pretty cool, hey? So if you want to turn your passion for sport into an impactful career, get ready to push the limits of exercise science, sport coaching, sport development, sport management, nutrition sciences, physical education, and more. You can do it all at Deakin. Apply now and study at Deakin University.
We do have an esteemed list of alumni who have held the role of Deakin University Sports Society President. So yes, motivation to join that society for all of you. I want to move on now to SportsGrad. Can you tell us a little more about SportsGrad and the range of services and things that you offer to students? And again, most of our students here may be members already, they may not be, and hoping to learn some more.
Yeah, for sure. So SportsGrad purely started out with my own self-interest. Like when I was in my first or second year, I loved sport, knew I wanted to work in sport, but had no idea what job you can do in sport. So to try and figure out my own career direction, I started interviewing people and filming it and then putting it on YouTube so that everyone else could find out what goes on in specific jobs in sport. And so the very first thing that SportsGrad offered was like a catalogue of jobs in sport, and that started as YouTube. It's now a 300 episode podcast. Episode 309 came out this morning. And so it started purely to try and help people solve their career direction issues. And then once it evolved, in 2020, I'd been working at Cricket Australia for 3 years at this point. COVID made my role redundant, which meant I jumped full-time into SportsGrad. So I thought about what more can I do to help people get jobs in sport? And so that started with some like career coaching service where I had hands-on help some people to land jobs. It then evolved into a community membership, which became a resource that people can use to get extra information, extra access to extra job opportunities, and access to extra networking opportunities as well. So everything that's in the membership is designed to kind of shortcut the time that it takes to get a job in sport. And then most recently have evolved it again into a accelerated mentoring program whereby you can work with myself and a set of SportsGrad mentors to really work intimately with you to help fast track your entry into the sports industry. So it's kind of taken a few evolutions from like an online product to like a self-service product to a done with you product. But as a result, we've been able to help over 700 people land jobs in sport, which has been very fulfilling.
Amazing. And one of the next events you have coming up is a collaboration with golf. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So that's probably the other thing that we do too, networking events. So we run SportsGrad meetups. We've done about probably 20 or 30 of them in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Mumbai, London, etc. And they are designed to help you guys connect with the sports industry. This one is specifically with Golf Australia. They're trying to recruit more people into their volunteering opportunities and into their talent pipeline of people that they can hire in the future. So if you want to create close connections with golf, this is a perfect event to do it. I think it's happening on the 27th of March. So if you want to wake up and go to a job surrounded by a golf course, it's a perfect place to be. But yeah, that'd be a good one to get onto.
Reuben, you've mentioned networking a couple of times already, and that's a topic we will return to. It's something that people find intimidating, and we'll try and perhaps debunk some of the myths around that quite shortly. But first, I wanted to talk to you about another issue that you raised in your introduction, and that was around the competitiveness of getting a job in sport. Can you talk a little bit more about that, your view of how competitive or challenging it is to get a job in the sports industry?
Yeah, it's hugely competitive. If you haven't already been made aware of that, let me open your eyes to it. If you think of like the supply and demand of how many jobs exist in sport and how many people want to fit into those jobs, it leads to a scenario where more often than not, 500 people apply for a job that is hiring one person. So you've got to be 1 in 500. And when I got my job at Cricket Australia, I think about 400 people maybe graduate from Deakin every year in sport. Could be wrong, but when you put that across, people graduating from La Trobe and Victoria University and UTS and Griffith, and then let alone all the other people coming out in business degrees as well, who aren't just studying sport, but can still fit into sport management roles, it's incredibly competitive. But I've found myself the only graduate stepping into the commercial team at Cricket Australia. Brant Hubber stepping into the same sort of commercial role at the AFL is probably the only other person I know who's been able to do it straight out of uni as well. But there are, I think, I saw a stat around that, there's 170,000 jobs in the Australian sports industry, and, probably a few thousand of those rotate every single year. So what it means is that you've got extreme amount of competitiveness. But what that means for you is that what separates the people who get the jobs is the people who are industry wanted rather than industry ready. Because universities do an excellent job of preparing you for the industry. So you've got hundreds of people, thousands of people industry ready, but only a few people who know how to make themselves industry wanted. And so the sports industry doesn't have a supply issue, it's got a filtering issue. And they will naturally go to the people who they can identify first and the quickest to help their own issues of how can we get someone into a job who's good and capable, but also timely and cost effectively. And so if you can make yourself known and become wanted in the industry, then you can bypass the 500 people waiting for a job in sport and land yourself into that job that you guys have invested a lot of money to achieve.
I like talking about this, the relative competitiveness of sport, and from my perspective, what you've said, Reuben, is absolutely spot on. It is difficult to get a job in sport, but every year, hundreds and hundreds of our graduates get jobs in the sport industry, so it's not impossible either. And actually, it's more than achievable, and you can expect it to happen if you do all the right things. And there's nothing unique about the competitiveness of the sport job market. In fact, there are dozens of other industries that are much harder to get jobs in than sport. Try finance and banking, journalism, media. I could go on and on. There's a lot of industries where it's very hard to get a job, and nothing that's good comes easy. So it's just about doing the right things, and if you do that consistently, you will make it happen. So the next question I had for you, Reuben, was around the process and strategies you would take if you were looking to enter the sports job market today. What would be the things that you're doing?
Yeah, so when you enter the working world, people are going to look at you like you are a product with a specific function. And you might be a wonderful person, a lot of fun to hang out with, but at the end of the day, you're getting paid to perform a specific set of tasks. And so getting someone to hire you is fundamentally the same as trying to sell any sort of product. But you guys are a product that is going to grow in value over time. So if we think of a like-for-like product, we can think about how do you sell that, so therefore how do you sell yourself? So take the example of a house. So when you buy a block of land to build a house, you start by putting the foundations down, you build the walls, you put the roof on top, and now you've got a house that you can sell. But even if you build a mansion on the best street in Melbourne, you've still got a house that's sitting there, and you still have to go out and make people aware that it is available for sale. So the first thing you need to do is figure out what has this house got to offer. So how many rooms are in the house? How many bathrooms? Does it have a pool? Does it have a second story? Based on what the house has got to offer, then you can think about who is the right type of buyer. So is it a young couple who can renovate it? Is it a large family that can move straight into it? And once you've identified, all right, this is what the house can offer and this is who it's suited for, then you can figure out, all right, this is how we can sell it appropriately to them. And then it's when you come up with your selling points. Once you have that position and that selling points figured out, then it's about how can we get as much awareness on this house as possible. So you put an ad in the paper, you put it on a website, you run an open inspection, maybe get a publicist to write a feature article. And through a combination of the correct positioning and a large amount of awareness, you get the best price for your house. So what does this have to do with careers in sport? Well, the same fundamentals apply to you guys. When you come out of school, you've got a vacant block of land. When you go to uni, you start to put the foundations on it. When you pick up work experience, you're building the walls, you put the roof on top. And when you graduate, now you've got a house you can sell. But that is where most people stop, and they never reach their full potential because of it. Where most people go wrong is they think that, all right, I've got a house to sell, how come no one's buying it? But really, they don't take the time to think about, well, how many rooms are in my house? How many bathrooms have I got? Who is the right type of buyer for my house? And then how do I get it out there to as many people as possible? And so what it takes to land a job in sport is knowing what you've got to offer and who can buy it, and then how do you make as many people aware of that as possible. And so on the awareness, on the positioning side, understanding what are your skills and what jobs in the sports industry do those skills fit. On the awareness side, it's making sure that, yes, you have a tight resume, but making sure you have a tight network as well. So like if you spend, 3 hours of your afternoon putting one resume together and to apply for one job, you might get the awareness of one person who picks it up. But if you go to an event that lasts 3 hours, then you might meet, 20 people at that event. And so now your time for spent towards gaining awareness of you and your house has now got 20 people aware of it. Now, you could also spend the same 3 hours writing 3 LinkedIn posts, and they might get 100 views each. And so now you've got 300 people who are aware of you. So what you have to do is make yourself aware to a large number of people in person, on paper, and online. And you can't just do one of them, you have to do all 3. And when the sports industry is incredibly competitive, it's the ones who take the time to figure out what's in my house, who's going to buy it, and how can I get it out there to as many people as possible. They're the ones who get dream jobs.
I like that analogy. And this is a good time, I think, to promote our seminar on mastering LinkedIn to advance your career, which Reuben will run just for Deakin students on the 26th of March. That will be online via Zoom. So you should have received an email about that to sign up. But maybe as a prelude to that, Reuben, could you talk just a little bit more about the role of LinkedIn and helping to drive that awareness piece that you were talking about when building your house?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first thing I understand is like recruiters are on there all the time using it to recruit talent. And when I was in university, a boss of mine said to me, Reuben, get on LinkedIn because that's where the people who are going to hire you are currently hanging out. So that's when I got started and started posting it. And all my friends said like, Reuben, what are you doing here? Like, why are you posting on LinkedIn? So it wasn't the cool thing to do at the time. It probably still isn't today, but it gave me a huge leg up in the job market. But what it basically did is it helped me build a personal brand very early on. And so that meant that when I was walking into the interview room at Cricket Australia, I was walking in from a position of strength rather than from the baseline where everyone else is. Because for the people who hadn't built up a personal brand on LinkedIn, the interviewer and the hiring manager really only had like a resume to go off before they got to find out more about who they were in person. Whereas because like when they looked me up, they could say, okay, Reuben has been posted on LinkedIn. We can trawl back through his content. We already can see what he's about. They're already thinking about hiring me. And so I'm walking in from up here rather than down here. And as a result, I left 60 Jollymont after my interview, came back to the Deakin Library here to study for my final exams. And 2 hours later, got a call from Cricket Australia who said, Reuben, we'd love to offer you the job. So having a personal brand and building it up on LinkedIn just gave me a huge advantage when it came to job hunting.
And it is, as you have implied there, something that people can find quite cringe, arguably, posting on LinkedIn and developing their LinkedIn. But the results of doing that for you was astronomical and continues to be to this day. And really, I can't think of any other platform or medium where you can show yourself to potential employers. So it's something that would be very well advised for all students to focus on, and perhaps to focus on from quite an early stage as well, because it takes a while to build it up and master it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a bit of a weirdo. I track all of my LinkedIn posts, and so I can see like when the results of my posts started to hit an inflection point and get better. And that was when I'd actually sat down and analyzed the first 400 posts that I'd put up. And the first 400 posts, some were good, some were bad. It was just like up, down, up, down. There's no sort of consistent upward trend. But after 400 posts, I sat down and took the top 100, analysed what worked, what didn't work, and then from that could come up with a bit of a strategy in terms of how do I want to grow my personal brand from here. So in the future, your personal brand is going to be probably the number one thing that continues to get you hired time and time again. So if you zoom out for a second and think, all right, well, I'm going to have a LinkedIn account probably for the next 40 years of my life, just spend the next 1 or 2 years just testing and learning. And it might take you to, take a deep breath and not care about what other people think. But by the end of a year or two, you should have enough data on posting that you can understand, okay, this is what is working for me. From here on forward, I can do it in a much more effective and meaningful way. And that means the next 38 years of your life are going to be a hell of a lot easier with that analysis behind you.
And you mentioned there that you did an analysis on what worked in your posts, and perhaps as motivation to come to our LinkedIn session, you can save some of those insights for then. And just finally on LinkedIn, I mean, the reality is you do this and you engage with it, or you do nothing and you don't use the platform that all employers use to get a sense of who people are. So that isn't much of a choice really, in my view. Maybe this is a good point. We've been talking for 20 minutes to open to the floor. Has anyone got any questions for Reuben? Someone will be brave. Oh, we've got one over there.
So when you said you were posting on LinkedIn, what exactly were you posting?
Yeah, great question. So when I was in uni, my content strategy, if you could call it that at the time, was just to say I was there. So I didn't want to try and come up with any opinions because I didn't really have any back then. I wasn't trying to be insightful because I couldn't think of any insights, but I just wanted to show people what I was doing. So for example, like I had an internship with Australian University Sport, went up to one of their conferences, and would just like put my phone in the air, take a really dodgy photo, and then chuck it on LinkedIn to say, hey, great to hear from such and such. Here are three things that I remember from their presentation. And then I would do the same thing at my local football club. Be like, hey, today we're running a stall at Ashburton's Fair. Here's like an activity that I made to help engagement with our stall to try and recruit more footballers. So it was really just kind of shedding a light onto what I was doing. And that meant that like anytime I volunteered or did anything, it was leveraged. Because when I did internship, the people around me know who I am and what I can do. But just by literally taking like a minute to take a photo and put it up online, it means like 100 extra people can now see that as well. And so when you like multiply that over the course of a year, the leverage you get over everybody else is huge over the course of 12 months. And that became the separation point by the time I graduated.
Any other questions? I think we have one from Zoom actually. So if you give me So Reuben, we have a question from James Capp, and he asks, have you noticed any differences between people transitioning into sport management from other industries with transferable skills when compared to people who are at the start of their careers?
Fundamentally, it is the same. You need to know what you can offer and who wants that skill set. However, it just becomes a lot harder the further you go into your career because there are just less jobs the higher up you go. But it still comes down to knowing what you've got and how to sell yourself into it. So, but the thing that I would point to for people trying to make a career change is getting super clear on what that is and trying to build networks in that space as early as possible, as well as trying to continue to get on LinkedIn and share that as well. So for the people that I come across who are trying to make a career change, it's more about just like helping them convince an employer that actually the skills you've got can fundamentally help the job that they need done. Maybe you had experience in a different industry, but that doesn't really matter too much. You can kind of pick that up pretty quickly. And so being able to demonstrate that you've been able to execute a marketing plan in the airline industry and achieve a specific awareness result, and how that can relate to growing badminton or whatever it might be, becomes pivotal. So being able to sell your experience and what you can do rather than be misunderstood is kind of the crucial point for those people trying to make a career change. But for people in this room who are coming out of an undergrad or early in the master's level, just know that it gets harder every year that goes on.
Yeah, good point. I think my next question is similar or related to that or tangential to it, and that is a lot of students in here, they know they want to work in sports, but perhaps they're not quite sure exactly in what role or area. What advice would you have for people in this position? And particularly our double degree students who study sports science and sport management.
Yeah, so I did the double degree as well, and before that jumped over the marketing degree. And to be honest, probably wasn't until I was like 26 years old did my career direction really start to become concrete. So take into account that it will be a journey that, you know, still carries on after you get your first job. But to land on a point where you figure out your career direction, what you want to do, is effectively a filtering process whereby you want to go out into the world and collect as much data about the different jobs options that you can do as possible, and then test each of them. And as soon as you don't like the look of one, or it's not for you, you cut it off. And so if you can imagine, like, you know, your capacity is going to increase significantly over time, and then you're eventually going to cull it back. So say you're starting doing nothing, you say yes to everything to eventually get to a breaking point. And like when I was in my final year of university, I remember getting home from the Unisport Australia conference. I'd been up there for 3 days, and I was coming back to run a networking event for DUS, whilst also trying to do 4 other internships, play, you know, train for footy twice a week, try to have a social life, the rest of it. I remember like getting home at like midnight, like collapsing in my bed. I was like, when is this going to end? So if you reach that point, you know you're on the right track. From that point, you then want to start saying no to things. So for me, like I did a strength and conditioning internship. I realized that wasn't for me, so I cut it off. And eventually over time, you end up with a couple of options where you're like, okay, I really enjoy these things. I'm good at them. I can see myself doing it for a while. And once you land on that point, that's when your career will start to take off. And it will take off exponentially. And so if you were to compare someone who's come straight out of school and gets pushed into, say, I'm going to pick on lawyers, you know, they get pushed into a legal job, and they don't really want to do it, but they're being forced into it, and they kind of just trudge along being a lawyer, and their career kind of gradually, literally takes off like this. If you take the time to figure out what you don't want to do, and what you do want to do, and eventually you land on a job that you really enjoy, after 3 or 4 years, you're probably going to be further behind than the person who picked law in year one. But because you've taken the time to understand what you enjoy the most, once you get into that job, your career is going to take off because you're going to love it. And that means within a couple of years, you're going to skyrocket past everybody else who picked a job too soon. So that's kind of how I'd think about it, but fundamentally it's a filtering process. So collect data and filter it down. And that's why I started the podcast, to collect that data quickly. So like I get messages from people saying, hey, Reuben, I've just spent the last 2.5 weeks binging the podcast at 1.5 speed, and now they know about 300 jobs in sport. Back when I was in uni, I had to go meet 300 people. So lean on podcasts, lean on blogs, lean on any sort of digital media you can, because that will help you speed up that filtering process.
And just to emphasize that, I think particularly for students who are just starting out on their journey of studying sport management and want to work in sport management, podcasts are such an easy win, and the SportsGrad podcast is perfect. You can, listen to that when you're doing your shopping, at the gym, you name it. You can get so much knowledge and insight in terms of what's out there, what you need to do by consuming that kind of content. So just wanted to emphasize that. My next question, Reuben, was around in-demand skills. You speak to so many employers, people working in sport. From what you see at the moment, what are the in-demand, most needed skills in the sports industry that potentially the people in this room will want to think about building up to cement themselves for the future?
When I was at Cricket Australia, they identified that a lot of the jobs there were generalist sort of roles. Like people in a lot of different departments could rotate into another department and do the same job because the skill set was fairly similar. And that generalist sort of skill set was kind of built on the fact of can you make a thing happen? And so what you needed for that to happen was can you project manage whatever you're working on? Can you communicate it with other people? And can you make your ideas come to fruition? So can you sell them? So if you can manage a project, if you can communicate with others and you can sell your ideas, there's going to be a whole host of jobs that you can do. Of course, there are other jobs that are more specific that you need, you need to understand the law for, or you need to understand science for. There are going to be a lot of those, but there are a lot that exist in that generalist skill set where fundamentals like, can you make the thing happen? The thing that if you were to focus on one of them, the one that people leave to last or don't develop the quickest is the ability to sell your ideas. What advantage you'll get by learning that is you'll learn how to sell yourself at the same time. And again, going back to the house analogy, a lot of people's careers fall short because they don't know how to sell themselves. So if you guys start now thinking about how can I sell myself, not only will you get a job, but by the time you get a job, you'll actually be more influential in that job because you'll be able to get your ideas off the ground.
There's just no substitute for communication skills is what I'm picking up from what you're saying there, Reuben. And the good news for all of you is that studying a degree is the perfect way to build those communication skills. Every time you turn up for a seminar and you have a group discussion activity, every time you go to a lecture or an event like this and you ask a question, it is building your communication skills and your confidence in building your communication skills. Those that don't turn up for class or don't turn up to events, they never engage in this process of building their communication skills. That's how you should really think about your seminars, lectures, and events like this. It's not just a place where you sit down and listen and learn things, knowledge. It's actually a forum for you to build your skills, and the most important skill of all, communication. Okay, so my next question. And yeah, let's get into this topic of networking. And by the way, perhaps I'll stop in another 5 minutes or so to invite questions from the audience. So yeah, get thinking if you have any. But Reuben, networking is a big focus for SportsGrad. What's your advice for building connections without it feeling forced or cringe, as some people might say?
Yeah, sure thing. So to give you context as to why it's important, at the start of this year, Cricket Australia called me up and said, Reuben, we need a commercial partnerships manager to start yesterday. Who do you know? And so I go to the first 3 people in my network. They interview 2 of them on the same day and make a hire within a few days. And so that job never gets advertised because Cricket Australia had to recruit someone very speedily. And so the people who made themselves known to me end up being a part of that process. So that is kind of what is going on behind closed doors. 80% of the of jobs in sport live in the hidden job market. So if you're wondering, if you ever get stuck thinking, why can I not find a job? How come I can't see my dream job out there at the moment? It's probably out there, but it's just existing in the minds of people who don't want to go to the public job boards. But in terms of how to grow those networks naturally, one of the things that people get wrong is they come in with too much urgency. They want a job so badly that it shows through their communication. And so they'll ask for a job straight away. I think the approach you've got to take is that it's going to be a long-term thing. And you've also got to remember that, networking is just kind of one of the 3 levers that you can pull on to land a job. The other one being your resume, the other one being LinkedIn. And when people entirely rely on networking as a method to get a job, it comes out in what they say. So I had someone shadowing me for a bit of content that I did late last year, and we were talking to people at the VIS, and they went up to one of them and said, "G'day, this is my name. Any chance you've got a job going for this?" And you could see it in the staff member of the VIS's face. They're like, gosh, I don't want to be having this conversation right now because he literally just met me. So when networking becomes your only go-to for a job, then it'll come out naturally. But when you are using all the levers, so your resume and your LinkedIn, then it becomes much more comfortable, and you naturally converse a lot better because that urgency won't be there. But if you had to kind of break it down, I would really just try and talk to the people that you are networking with like you've known them for 5 or 6 years. Talk about regular things. Because these people are regular people at the end of the day, and they've been around long enough to know that yes, you're trying to grow your career, and yes, you'll probably lean on them in the future at some point in time. But one of the key questions that they are going to try and answer in their mind for when it comes to hire someone is, how well can this particular candidate fit in with the team? And so we're talking about cultural fit, and that is like your ability just to kind of, converse with people around you. So really, every time you're networking, you can kind of just converse naturally and normally. You don't need to ask for a job, because what you're really signaling is, I could fit in well with the team. So you're going to be doing it anyway. So just kind of keep that in mind, that like one of the ways you can ask for a job is just by showing you are a good cultural fit. So yeah, I hope there's a bit in that to think about.
It seems like, and this is how I like to think of it, you want to network so that you're building up almost systematically over time your relationships with people, creating a relationship, and it would be a weak tie. These are not anyone that are your best friends, or they might turn out to be like that, but the goal, I think, and I'd be interested in your views on this, Reuben, is just to make a positive impression with this person. And if you do that with enough people over time, and then they are advertising in 18 months, and they see your name, and they say, oh yeah, I had a positive conversation with that person. That is effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone said to me, Reuben, you'll never know when you'll need your network until you do. And when my job got made redundant during COVID, boy, did I need my network at that point in time. But for you guys starting out now, like, you guys have got time to build up networks, and it might not be pressing right now, but you'll be so grateful you'll build it up by the time you graduate. So to give you another example, like it was at the DUS Industry Networking dinner at the end of 2016 that I met a guy called Joel Morrison. He's now the Executive Events and Operations at Cricket Australia. And I followed him up after that event, and we had a coffee, and then 6 months later we had another coffee, and then 6 months after that, so we're now a year down the track, a job comes up at Cricket Australia for the commercial team. And I didn't want to leave anything to chance for this job interview. And so I called up Joel and I said, hey Joel, what do you know about the manager for this role, Mike Morris? What do you know about the commercial team, or what's involved for the job? What do you know about the interview process at Cricket Australia? And he spoke to me for 45 minutes, told me everything I needed to know. He then goes and taps Mike on the shoulder and says, hey, there's this guy called Reuben coming. I know him. I trust him. I think you should seriously consider him. And for me to get that information and to get that in and get that referral took, attending one event for 2 hours, having the courage to reach out to him and have a 1 hour coffee a month after that, and then reaching out again for another 1 hour coffee 6 months after that. So up to about 4 hours of effort to get a job at Cricket Australia. So if you can start planting seeds now and let them kind of grow naturally over time, your network will naturally help you. But if you leave it too late, that's when the urgency will come out in your voice. That's when you'll probably burn a few bridges, and that's when it will become extremely tough.
Great advice. So any other questions at this stage?
How would you start networking without a full degree and without those direct links to people?
Yeah, great question. So one of the advantages that you have when you're in uni is that nobody expects much of you. So if you're to go and reach out to people in the industry, and actually this quote came from Lena Staropoli, who used to be a partnerships manager at Cricket Australia. She said on the podcast that she's under no illusion that, she's going to give you more than she receives in a conversation. So given that it's not going to be, a like-for-like interaction, that's totally fine. Like, people know they're giving back their time. But the thing you have to remember is people want to help. People want to give their time to you. And it really just takes you to ask to open up that door. Because the thing is with sport, because of how competitive it is and how reliant it is on people that they know, everybody has had, say, a Joel Morrison in my case, who's helped them get in the door, which means everyone kind of feels obligated to pay it forward. So really, if you kind of allow yourself just to be the person who asks the question, you should be able to start more of those conversations. But as long as you can kindly and gently ask, say you go through LinkedIn at the moment, you find someone that you like. Let's say to Lena, for example, you reach out to Lena Staropoli, who I believe is at Netball Australia now, and you say, hey Lena, can see you're at netball now. Netball's my favourite sport. Also just heard from Reuben this week. I believe you crossed over at Cricket Australia back in the day. I'm really interested in partnerships / what it's like to work in Netball Australia. Any chance we can catch up for 20 or 30 minutes over Zoom at the end of next week? And so what you've done there is make it easy for her to say yes. So you haven't asked for her to, travel out to the mountains or whatever to have a 2-hour coffee. It's like you can jump online, or you can do it on your Thursday or Friday when your workload's probably low. So if you can give them, at least 10 days, make it easy and just ask a question, maybe introduce some common ground where you can, and also show some appreciation for their career. Like, hey, I love how you've been able to grow your career from a master's degree at FIFA in Switzerland up to Netball Australia now. You're more likely to get a yes.
There's another easy win, I think, that is a stop short of meeting someone for coffee or a meeting. And let's just say let's take Reuben today. You've come to his talk and you have enjoyed it. So later on, you could add him on LinkedIn and not necessarily ask for any of his time for a meeting, but to just message him and say, I really enjoyed your talk today. Here's the part I enjoyed. And that will take you 1 minute. But Reuben will probably remember your name now and have a positive association. So down the track, if there are any jobs going in your organizations, Reuben, that might make the difference. You never know.
100%. There are people who've messaged me for, the last few years who I remember. So, and everyone will remember. So if you send a kind message to someone, know that it will stand out in their mind. On the topic of asking, hey Reuben, do you have a job at SportsGrad? I had someone do this to me the other day, and my advice to them was to flip it. So if you're going around asking people for a job, you're creating work for them. So you're making them think of an opportunity for you. And they've probably got a million things going on in their mind right now. They don't need to think of, how can I give this person an opportunity to do a few different things that I'm not really sure, bottom of the list, they just say no, and you end up with nothing. What you can do instead is, again, coming back to the networking question, is make it easy for them to say yes. So for example, you might come up to me and say, hey Reuben, been following your TikTok for a while and can see that, you haven't posted on there in the last 4 months. Is there any reason for that? Priorities have just been stretched across a number of different things, but we'll eventually get back to it. And then you could say something like, look, I'm looking to grow my experience in social media. I would love to create content and clip some highlights from the podcast for you to grow it. Any chance, if you can send me the footage, I'll clip it and caption it for you, and you can just post it straight up. And then I'm like, well, yeah, that's easy. I don't have to think. You've already come up with your job description. Here's the keys, off you go. And now you've got an opportunity. So you can kind of do that anywhere you go. And one of the best places to do that is in places that have low barriers to entry. So startups, pretty low barrier to entry. Grassroots clubs, very low barrier to entry. You are basically pitching to a time poor president. Charities as well, university societies. The other benefit of this is it means you can actually create your own dream example because no one is forcing you to do a certain thing. The internships at larger organizations can be great. You'll get, Collingwood Football Club on your resume, but you'll be given 3 or 4 tasks that you have to do every single time. There's not much scope creep. Whereas for the guys at Dust, it's really you guys can work backwards from whatever example you want to create. And so for me at Dust, I was like, well, Cricket Australia, they didn't need to know that at the start of the year that I took over presidency that, everyone else had graduated or left the committee and it was down to me and a bloke, Paul. So we're a committee of 2. No one else wanted to do it. And it was up to us to kind of decide what do we want this club to be? And I kind of saw that, all right, this club's got the word Deakin in it. I've got the title of president. In the eyes of people on the outside, it's probably going to come across quite impressively. So I threw everything into making that experience the main one that would get me a job at the end of the year. Tracked my results along the way. And when I got into the interview room, they asked me, Reuben, what experience are you most proud about in your career so far? I said, I'm most proud of growing a society dedicated to helping my peers get jobs in sport. So coming back to what I said, you can create an example like that that's going to be the most meaningful example you share at an AFL, a netball, a cricket, whatever, just by approaching the low barrier opportunities around you.
Amazing. We have a question from the Zoom call, and I think it's a good one. What kind of things do you talk about with the people you are networking with? Try not to come over as pushy or cringy. How would you think about that?
Yeah, so like when I was in university, the things that I just try and talk about is like, what are you working on at the moment? Like, what projects are you currently working on? What's coming up in the future? Just kind of hear what their goals and aspirations are. Or if I had taken the time to learn a bit more about them, you might ask like, why did you make a particular change between jobs? So you might say something like, hey, I see that you've, you stayed at one particular job for 7 years and you've been in this job for 6 years. Like, what led to you changing? Or you could ask the reverse of that. Hey, I see you've been in this job for 9 years. What keeps you in this current role? Because for me at that point in time, understanding, career direction, what I want to do with my career was important to me. So that's kind of a natural one. Another one is, if you see that the organization is in the news, get their opinion on that particular thing. But really, like, if you do literally 10 minutes of preparation before you meet someone, you will stand out head and shoulders above every other graduate that they meet. Because 99 out of 100 aren't going to the lengths to kind of research intimately these people. And so I really notice when someone has taken the time to look me up, even listen to a different podcast I've been on, and then reference like a story or something I've mentioned on that podcast to start a conversation with me. And so that's something that I kind of encourage SportsGrad members to do is literally, if you want to grow your network in sport, go through the catalogue of SportsGrad podcast episodes, find a person whose job you like, listen to it, note down something of note, and then use that to connect with them. So like, for example, if you were to listen to Ermila Rosario, who's the team manager of the Australian cricket team, and you go back to her episode in episode 82 when she was the team manager of the Australian women's cricket team, you might hear how she started at the Saka and made her way across. So then you can message her and be like, or if you meet her in person, you can say something like, hey, I listened to your episode on the SportsGrad podcast, saw that, you had made this change from Saka to Cricket Australia. How did the opportunity come about? And just by saying like, I took the time to listen to a 50-minute podcast you were involved in is going to make them so appreciated that they'll want to, connect with you.
And all of this comes back to the point that you make quite frequently, Reuben, and there's a reason for all of this. Is it 70 or 80% of jobs in sport go on the grey market, which is people give jobs to those that they know, and there's no escaping that. And it's the quicker, I guess, you grasp that and realize the importance of networking and meeting people, the better positioned you'll be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about relationships. And at the end of the day, you're dealing with individuals. And I heard Hugh Jackman mention on the podcast that his mum said to him when he was young, everybody needs to be appreciated. Doesn't matter who you are. So if you can just share a bit of appreciation for people you're trying to connect with in sport, you're going to come across much better.
Any other questions?
So I'm just a first year sports management student, so you're not me out using the 3 letters that you said to apply for actual jobs, but is it similar or different strategy when justifying for like internship positions or short-term things that may pop up at organisations and stuff?
Fundamentally, it's the same, because if someone's going to hire you into an internship, they still need to know that you can add value to it. So I would still be doing all three. And really, like, if you do it properly, your resume should be the least important one of the three. But if I was to get started now, I'd start with LinkedIn, build up a brand, use that to connect with people, because, when you reach out to people on LinkedIn to network with them, the first thing they're going to do is look at your profile. So you want to have a profile that's worth connecting with. And looking at your recent content comes into consideration with that. And then really, like, the final piece of the puzzle should be like, all right, here's my resume, here's everything else I've done. Most people try and do it in reverse, and then they end up stuck and job hunting 6 months after graduation. So all three apply to you. The challenge for you in first year is probably just like staying patient and also reminding yourself that all the work you're putting in now is going to help you in 3 years from 3 years time. So like I was chatting to someone during the week and they were like, oh, Reuben, like I'm pretty comfortable here. Like I've got my one internship and I know a few people, like I'm pretty okay. And depending on how driven you are to make your university degree and all the money and time that you've invested into coming to fruition and at a particular level, that should guide how much effort you put in. And it's the ones who put in a sustained effort over 3 years that get the dream jobs, because, the top jobs are the national sporting bodies and the elite sporting clubs. There's only a few dozen of them available for entry level people. And so if you want to be considered in that category, starting now is hugely advantageous because nobody does.
Did you have any mentors or people you could lean on during, your uni degrees, and even to the point where you got the Cricket Australia job, people you fall back on during the whole journey?
Yeah, great question. So I was lucky to be mentored by a guy called Wayne Oswald. So on the same night that I met Joel Morrison at the Dust dinner, I actually invited Wayne to this dinner because I'd recently joined the committee, had his email, invited him along. But on the night, I was too scared to actually go and say hi to him. So the next day, I was incredibly embarrassed that I was too afraid to approach him. So I thought I'd call him up. And at the last minute, I was calling up just to say thanks for coming. The last minute, I thought I should probably ask for a coffee. You're meant to network. This could be useful. But that's when I froze and I had my phone out with his number punched into it and let's walk around my backyard for the next 25 minutes trying to bring myself to press call. I eventually got into Wayne, asked him for a coffee, and we sat down for 45 minutes the next week, and he spoke to me for about 43 of those minutes and texted me later that night and said, hey Reuben, lovely to meet you. Want to catch up at the same time next week? And I was like, I don't know what I've done to deserve this, but sure, let's go again. Halfway through that, he says, hey Reuben, I'm the coaching director at the Prahran Junior Football Club. I need some operational help. Can you do it? So I just jumped at it and said yes immediately. And that meant for my last year of university, Wayne became my mentor. And he'd previously worked in the AFL and was incredibly well connected. And so he became my go-to for any decisions I was trying to make or advice I needed. And he exposed me to certain people and certain environments that gave me a hell of a lot of experience. And so that meant that the first 4 years of my pursuit to get a job in sport with no mentor, I think I picked up maybe 1 or 2 internships and dropped out a degree and failed a couple of exams. With Wayne's mentorship and help, in that last year, I added another 6 internships, passed all my exams, graduated with distinction, and got a full-time job at Cricket Australia at the end of it. So having Wayne there for advice, but most importantly, belief, was incredibly crucial to that, because a lot of the time when you are trying to pursue a job in sport, you kind of are holding on with hope that it's going to work out at the end. And if you've got someone who backs you and believes in you, that can be enough to give you the energy to keep going. So yeah, mentors were incredibly valuable to me.
Thank you. I think that's amazing advice. And I just want to emphasize something that really came out to me there, is that you described yourself whilst you were an undergraduate being too scared to say hello to someone. And now, how many years on? I don't know, but you are an extremely effective communicator and know all of this about networking and how to build your personal brand. So I just encourage you all to think about that as well, that the journey that you can go on. And perhaps my question to you is, what do you think allowed you to develop from that stage where you were too scared to say hello to someone?
Yeah, so the reason why I can now communicate well from a place of not being able to communicate at all was because it was a problem for me. And even back in high school, whenever I try and tell a story, my friends would groan and say, oh, here comes another one of Reuben's ramblings. And it made me incredibly insecure. And so it became a thing that I wanted to get better at. And so it was just through a conscious effort of thinking about what am I saying that allowed me to get better at communicating. Whereas I think if I had just kind of naturally had the gift of the gab and hovered in that sort of happy medium, it probably wouldn't have been as pressing of an issue enough for me to actually think about, and probably would have stayed there. So through being terrible at it, I made a conscious effort and now can do okay.
So that's a growth mindset, is determining that you wanted to get better at it and you became better. So that's available to all of us, I think. Any other questions? I do have a couple from Zoom. And one from Carl, he asks, are there any other certifications you achieved outside of your university degree that helped you gain leverage over others? If not, would that be helpful in the job market?
Specifically for me, no, I didn't do any extra study. But in terms of extra education, it really comes down to what job do you want to achieve or what job do you want to do. And so that's where like coming back to that filtering process for your career direction becomes incredibly important, because if you can test, say, 20 different jobs and then narrow it down to 5, then you can think about, all right, well, what do I need to do to take the next step in these 5 particular jobs? And for some of them, extra study might be a thing that you need to do. But you'd rather find out at that stage that you need to do it and then invest heavily into it and it'd be worthwhile than, doing it at the start and then later realize, actually, I found out halfway through this, extra study or certificate that I don't want to go down this path. So my advice to people thinking about extra study is figure out where do you want your career direction to go, and then what do you need to get there, and think about what do the people who are already in those jobs have that help them get there. And so again, that's a question that I'll ask people on the podcast, what university study did you do, so that people can understand all right, what are the qualifications you need for this job?
And just one other quick fire question from Zoom. Are there any events planned for Brisbane or Gold Coast?
Not at the minute, but would love to get up there soon. So sometime during the year, we'll get another event up there in the future.
Stay tuned for that. And perhaps just my last question to you. We've got students in here studying a double degree or just sport management or just sports science or perhaps the Master of Business Sport Management. What's your final bits of advice in terms of concrete practical steps that these people can take away to help them on their journey towards achieving their dream of working in the sports industry?
Gosh, where to begin? I think probably the one thing that separates, people at the very pointy end of this journey as you go through university is really, and this is going to be very sort of cliche advice, sorry to, skip the concrete part, but it does, the people who want it the most get the results. And so I guess the concrete part of it is remind yourself how much you want it. Because at some point in time, you went to a sporting game or you played sport and you fell in love with it, and that's led to where you are right now. And I encourage you to reconnect back with that and what it would feel like to be a part of that moment for the rest of your career. And literally write it down on the top of your notepad every single day for the rest of your degree, and remind yourself why you're doing this, to keep taking that next extra step. Because the alternative is you fall into a job that you don't enjoy. And I speak to a lot of people who don't enjoy their jobs, and it comes out in every other area of their life. And then some of them make their way back to me and try and make a career change at 30, 40, even 50. And they're the ones who perhaps, didn't think about how good it would be to throw everything at it and how much they wanted it in the very beginning. So I guess if you can remind yourself why you get started for a job in sport, write it down every single day, and also just remember that it's not going to be handed to you, then you will do whatever is necessary to make it a reality by the time that you graduate.
Amazing. And we've come to the end of the session, but I'm sure Reuben will hang around for a little while to talk to any students that would like to meet him. And I just want to say again, thank you all for coming along today, and hope to see you next week for our Career Expo, which starts at 10:30, and you should have received some email communications about that. So once again, can we just have a round of applause for Reuben?
Hey, last thing before you go. Everyone knows the sports industry is super competitive, so you might want to keep this to yourself. But every Monday, I send out an email called Shortcuts by SportsGrad. It takes 5 minutes to read and it gives you everything you need to get an edge over other job hunters on a silver platter. Here you'll find exclusive job opportunities, networking events, and premium resources to get ahead. Again, it takes less than 5 minutes to read and it's designed to help you get ahead and stay ahead. So if you want to receive the next one in your inbox, head to sportsgrad.com.au/newsletter. But as I mentioned, competition for jobs in sport is red hot, so perhaps keep this to yourself.